Hello everyone, today we're going to deconstruct a few sounds on my Prophet 5. Why is deconstructing a sound so important when it comes to sound programming? Most of the time we actually do the reverse process. So we either start from a basic program, a blank canvas, and we start altering that sound in order to reach a certain sound that we have in our mind, or other times we start from a preset, from a ready sound, and again we edit that sound in order to reach a desired outcome. But so again, in both cases, the aim is the same, is to reach a certain sound that we have in our mind. Other times we actually don't even have a desired outcome, in the sense that we start from a basic program and then we just follow our imagination, follow our intuition, or pure chance, if you want, and just see where that intuition leads us without having a certain desired outcome in our mind. And that is a very fun activity and a very, if you want, meditational activity to do, and it's got its time and place. But when it comes to trying to learn sound programming, there is no better way than deconstruction. And what do I mean by sound deconstruction? I mean, starting from a preset, not a basic program, an actual preset on your synthesizer. So a certain sound that you like, or anyway, a sound that has got some prominent, recognizable feature, like, I don't know, like a movement in the sound, or like a certain softness or harshness to the sound, something that you can, put your finger on straight away. So you start from that and then take stuff out, so subtract stuff. You take things off. And every time that you take something off, you then realize what in the synthesizer was responsible for that particular feature in the sound that you were hearing before you switched it off, but you can't hear it anymore because now it's off. For instance, you switch off an oscillator, you switch off a modulation destination, and see how the sound changes as a result of that. But let me try and be a bit clearer, and let's move over to the Prophet and let's start doing this. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's have a look at sound 134. Okay, what do we hear? There's like one sound, and then there's another note one octave higher, and la, and then of course there is this movement. Okay, let's try and switch off something and see what changes. So if I switch off oscillator A, I lose the bottom end part. Let's now do the opposite, switch that back on, switch off the two waveforms in oscillator B. I lose the top end. Okay, now this movement is probably created either by the LFO. Well, let's verify straight away by switching off the LFO. It was created by the LFO. Also, the Prophet 5 has got this wonderful feature that, when in preset mode, if you turn any knob, you reach a point where the display shows you a little red dot. That little red dot is reached when the position of the knob that you're touching is the position at which it was recorded when the sound was saved. So basically, that's the actual value. The knob right now reflects the actual value. So there is a bit of initial amount. So the LFO, the initial amount for the LFO means that the LFO is somewhat activated even without us using the modulation wheel. Obviously, if we do use the modulation wheel, the effect is much more. But let's put the modulation wheel back to 0. So that's an initial amount. The frequency, let's intervene on the frequency. Okay, let's make it even more obvious by increasing the frequency a bit. So now we know that there is a triangle LFO working on. So these are the destinations for the LFO. We have the frequency of oscillator A, the frequency of oscillator B, and the filter. Let's see what changes if I switch off the filter as a destination. There's a subtle change in the sound, but not much. Obviously, when the filter is activated, you can feel a bit of movement in the actual frequency cutoff. So let's try and emphasize the effects of the LFO by increasing the initial amount. Let's change waveform. Let's go on a square waveform. Okay, now we can actually feel the effect on the pitch much more. There's a fourth interval there. So if we switch off one of the one of the destinations as the LFO effect, we will be able to hear the effects of the LFO only on one of the oscillators. One stays, well, let's switch off the filter as well. So now we have oscillator B that only gives us that higher note, but there is no movement in the higher note because oscillator B is not a destination for the LFO modulation anymore. If we do the opposite, switch off oscillator A with any waveform really, and switch on oscillator A and switch off oscillator B, we can actually hear the lower sound. This time the lower sound has got that pitch change, which is the LFO modulation applied to the frequency. If we switch off frequency of oscillator B again, then we will hear, when we switch off oscillator B back, that movement in the pitch is everywhere. And I can also detect a certain detuning effect. There's a certain drift between the pitch of oscillator A and oscillator B anyway. So I suspect that the fine knob is not on zero, because there is a little bit of difference. Okay, it's not on zero, but it's not too much. It's about more than 2.5. So let's try and switch it off. There's a little bit of a, they call it chorusing effect, which happens when we slightly detune oscillator A and oscillator B. Okay, well, this is what. Okay, let's leave the oscillator section. There doesn't seem to be much movement in the sense of the modulation of the filter cutoff through time, which is created by the envelope amount. Let's see if we are right. There's a little bit. Okay, what we could try and do is to bring in a little bit of movement of the cutoff frequency through time. The way that we can do that is by lowering the cutoff frequency amount, the frequency cutoff amount, because the envelope amount functions at its best when the initial amount of the cutoff is set to low. Because if the filter is already open or almost fully open, there's not so much that the envelope can draw from. What we do, we bring the cutoff knob down, and we bring the envelope amount 2/3. Now that we've done this, so now that we have increased the difference between the cutoff and the envelope amount, so now these knobs in the lower end of the filter section come in their own space, in the sense that they come into play to a much greater extent. So the attack is the amount of time that it takes for the filter cutoff to reach its maximum amount as it's set by a combination of the cutoff and the envelope amount. So when the attack is close to zero, there's a much more sudden spike. That's why you hear this chum chum. Whereas as we slow the attack down, it takes much longer for the frequency cutoff to reach its maximum. Once it reaches its maximum, there's a second phase, and the second phase is the one set by the sustain. So after the initial amount, which is a combination of cutoff and envelope, is reached in the time that is set by the attack, then the sustain level determines the amount of the frequency cutoff after that initial amount. So basically is the final value that we want the frequency cutoff to be set at for the rest of the time that we have our finger on the key. But the time that it takes to reach that level determined by the sustain knob, is the decay. So what we can do, obviously, if we put a sustain which is sort of the same amount as the initial amount or higher, we don't hear much. Normally, you would put a sustain which is lower. This is, I guess, for a couple of reasons. One is to simulate the behavior of a lot of acoustic instruments that are, they have a sudden, like a piano, there is a growth in volume and texture of the sound, and then the sound sort of dies. So this can be emulated by placing the sustain knob quite low, and then the decay acts as the time that it takes for the sound to die down to the level which is determined by the sustain. Obviously, the filter is this. This is the frequency. We can emphasize all this by bringing up, actually I don't know what the resonance is for this patch. It's sort of half the way. We can emphasize this even more by increasing the resonance even more. As you know, the resonance is an emphasis of some frequencies around the filter cutoff point. So let's choose a sound now. Okay, 222. 222 is a very powerful sound. Now all the waveforms are on. Let's try and switch off oscillator B. So let's have oscillator A. We have this like chum, chum. So that's oscillator A. That's oscillator B. Oscillator B doesn't die. So let's work on oscillator A. Oscillator A has a spike and then it dies down. Why does it die down? Okay, first thing, now remember oscillator A is the only oscillator to which we can apply polymode. Polymode can only have oscillator A as a destination. Therefore, if polymode works somewhere, it works on oscillator A. So let's have a look. When we switch off the filter and the pulse width A as a destination, we can't hear anything. So it means that this spike is a result of a strong application of a strong use of the polymode, because once the polymode is off, there's no voice at all. Oscillator A doesn't sound anything. Basically, what polymode does here, it like increases tenfold. It emphasizes the amount of filter envelope, because the filter envelope is actually set to 0 in the filter section. But it seems to work a lot more just because the filter envelope volume is set to maximum as a source. So as you can hear, once we bring that knob up, the effect changes. This effect, there's an effect on the pulse width of oscillator A as well, but it's probably not as audible as the effect on the filter. Let's try and switch off the filter. Well, that's the thing. If we switch off the filter, there is no oscillator A. But if we want an effect on the polymode on the pulse width, we need to hear oscillator A, and we do that by bringing up the cutoff filter point. Now this is interesting. Now oscillator A, when we do that, oscillator A sounds much more similar to oscillator B. So yeah, interesting. So I learned a new thing today. I learned that using the filter both as a source of the polymode and as a destination of the polymode emphasizes the work down by the filter envelope a lot. So it's great to create this spike. Let's see if we would be able to create such a spike without using polymode. what we would have to do would be setting the cutoff, the frequency cutoff quite low, the envelope amount quite high. So yeah, similar, and the resonance quite high, and then again the attack and the decay used. Yeah, so we could sort of replicate that. Of course, now we have gone far away from the sound, but it doesn't matter. We're doing, you know, we're doing remarks and trying to learn things. What is it, this thing that we can hear in the sound? That's probably the LFO. We can see that there's a square waveform activated for the LFO. Let's try and see what happens if we switch it off. So now let's switch it on again and emphasize it. Let's work on the initial amount, which is... So the only destination of that LFO is the filter. Let's try and switch that off. So now that movement has gone. Let's try and see. So in order to bring this sound to a much flatter sound, all we have to do now is to switch off the envelope amount in the filter session and just give it. When we do that, these four knobs basically don't work anymore when the envelope amount is set to 0, unless the filter envelope is being used in the poly mode. Okay, we have got to a much flatter sound. We can leave this sound now. Let's do one last, maybe let's try a sound in which oscillator B is used as an LFO rather than as an actual sound source. You see? Okay, let's analyze this sound here. This sound here, 2 to 1. So once you have pressed the key, the sound doesn't seem to ever die. Okay, a lot of waveforms are on. First thing, let's switch off oscillator B. We have a sound with a very high release probably. So probably the release knob is like set to maximum. Yeah, it's like almost maximum in the amplifier section. And the release in the filter session is about 2/3 of the way. So the sound, that's the reason for the sound to stay. Okay, let's do the opposite. Let's switch on oscillator B and switch off oscillator A. Okay, as we should have imagined, as we could have imagined, oscillator B cannot be heard as a sound source because as this button testifies, the low frequency button is on in the oscillator B section. It means that oscillator B is being used as an LFO. So you can't actually hear it as a sound. So what does it do? So the only actual sound source is oscillator A. So if we have a look on the left here, we see that the poly mode is on. The destination of the poly mode is in the filter. Let's try and switch that off and see what happens. Not much changes. Yeah, well, there's a slightly greater emphasis on the filter when the filter is activated as a destination in the poly mode. Let's see who is responsible as a source of the poly mode. So let's turn the knobs. So the filter envelope is to 0. So the envelope section is not a source for the poly mode. As we could have imagined, oscillator B is the source, but not that much. It's almost set to 0. So let's try and bring it up. Okay, when we turn this knob up, the oscillator B as an LFO is used much more as a source for the poly mode, as an LFO source. Okay, let's repress the button, let's reset the sound. What else do we hear in the sound? Apart from the fact that the release is very high and the sound doesn't ever seem to die. There's something that changes through time, and actually, I was wrong. There is a lot more movement in the sound as a result of the filter being on. But there must be something else, and there's an LFO working as well. Let's try and switch off the LFO. To try and understand a bit more, let's bring the release back a bit. This might help us. So now let's switch off the triangle waveform in the LFO, thus deactivating the LFO. Okay, what's doing this? It's the poly mode. It is the poly mode. Of course, you see? Yeah, I keep learning. Now it's the poly mode that gives us this effect, because this effect is the filter going through time being modulated by, through the poly mode being modulated by oscillator B, because oscillator B is has a square wave, as we can see. So let's leave just the square wave. Let's switch off the triangle. We can hear this effect even more now. It's amplified. So that's the movement in the sound. Oscillator B functioning as an LFO. I don't know if this experiment is interesting to you. I personally think that this way of, again, deconstructing the sound is a very useful way of learning, just to learn. I wanted to improvise this, so I didn't want to prepare a sound. I wanted to improvise and to learn together with you. So obviously this might have had the effects of like making me look a bit unprepared at times, but I can live with that. I don't care about that. Actually, I love learning, even if that is happening in real time with you guys. So I think that I'm going to do some more of these experiments. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you did, and if you like what I do, please subscribe to my channel. I'm actually really happy that the channel is growing at its speed. I don't have a huge amount of time to be posting a video every week, so I just do it when I can. But these videos do take some time, so if you feel like you want to help me in any way, please like the videos and subscribe. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.